The sky was gray, and cold wind moved through the broken streets of the colony. Ruined buildings stood like skeletons, silent and forgotten. People walked fast, heads down, not looking at anyone. No one had time for kindness, not anymore. Not. After the war, not after the hunger, she walked slowly, barefoot. Her feet red from the freezing ground. Her body was thin, too thin for someone who had once carried children. Her skin was pale violet, marked with old scars and dirt. She wore a torn piece of cloth over her shoulders, shaking from the cold. Her stomach growled loudly. But no one turned to look. She was an alien widow, a stranger, and to most, that meant she was nothing. She passed by a food stall, where the smell of soup made her legs weak. She stepped forward, eyes wide, lips dry. "Please." She whispered to the man behind the counter. "Just a bite." The man glared. "Get away from here." She backed away, shaking, tears filling her eyes. "Please," she begged again. "I haven't eaten in days." He threw dirty water at her feet. "Go beg somewhere else." She turned and walked away, stumbling as people moved past her like wind. She made it to the corner of a broken bakery, collapsed near a stone wall. Her knees gave out, and she sank to the ground. She placed a hand on her stomach and closed her eyes. Death would be quiet here, she thought. At least the cold would numb the pain. But then she heard small footsteps, light and careful. She opened her eyes and saw a little human girl standing. In front of her, the girl had a long brown coat and held something behind her back. The widow didn't speak, didn't have the strength. The girl tilted her head, her voice soft. "Are you hungry?" The widow slowly nodded. The girl pulled out a piece of bread. Not fresh, but still whole. The alien widow reached out with trembling fingers. But the girl didn't hand it over just yet. Instead, she asked, "Will you come with me?" The widow blinked, confused. The girl's eyes were full of something strange: kindness, curiosity, maybe even hope. "I live with my dad," the girl said. "He cooks better food than this." The widow tried to speak, but only air came out. The girl stepped closer, took the widow's hand in hers. "I'll give you this bread," she said, "if you come with me." The widow didn't understand what kind of offer this was. But the bread looked so close, and the girl felt so warm. Slowly she stood, her body shaking, her legs barely holding her weight. The girl smiled and led her down a side path. They passed quiet homes, broken machines, and flickering lights. Soon they stopped in front of a small metal building with smoke coming from the top. Inside it was warm, filled with the smell of cooked stew. A man stood at a stove, stirring a pot with focus. He turned when the door opened, and his eyes narrowed. When he saw the stranger, the widow stood at the door, unsure. The man's voice was calm but firm. "Lena, who is this?" The girl smiled proudly. "She's hungry, Dad." The man looked at the alien woman for a long moment. He didn't speak, but something in his face softened. He turned back to the pot. "There's enough for one more bowl." Lena clapped her hands and pulled the widow inside. She helped her sit at a small wooden table. The widow sat slowly, her body tired, her mind spinning. Steam rose from the pot as the man poured stew into a bowl. He placed it in front of her without a word. She stared at it for a second, then lifted the spoon with shaking hands. The first bite burned her tongue, but she didn't care. The warmth spread through her chest. Like fire in the middle of a storm, tears filled her eyes as she ate slowly. She looked at the man and whispered, "Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer right away. Lena answered instead, her voice full of innocence. "Because you looked like you needed someone." The widow stared at her, not knowing what to say. A child had done what no adult had dared, offered her food, warmth and something more. Offered her a place in a broken world, and in that moment, the cold inside her heart began to melt. Just a little asterisk, she sat in silence, her hands wrapped around the warm bowl. The food was simple potatoes, dried meat, soft vegetables, but to her, it tasted like life. Each bite was slow, careful. Like she was afraid the warmth might disappear. The small girl, Lena, sat across the table, swinging her legs. Smiling softly, the man, Ethan, leaned against the kitchen wall, arms crossed. Eyes watching without a word. No one spoke for a while. Only the sound of the spoon touching the bowl when the widow finished eating. She placed the spoon down slowly. Her hands trembled, not from hunger now, but from something deeper. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thin and unsure. "Ethan?" Gave a short nod. "You're safe, here for now." His voice wasn't warm. But it wasn't cold either, just tired, like a man who had seen too much. Lena jumped off her seat and grabbed the widow's hand. "Come on, I'll show you your room," she said brightly. The widow hesitated, but followed. They walked down a narrow hallway into a small room with an old mattress, a blanket, and a cracked window. There was no luxury, but it was more than she'd had in weeks. Lena pointed proudly. "This used to be my mom's room, but she's not here anymore." The widow froze. Unsure what to say, Lena smiled sadly. She went to the stars and skipped away before tears could fall. Alone in the room, the widow sank onto the mattress. She stared at the ceiling, letting herself cry for the first time in days. The tears came quietly, falling onto the blanket as her body shook. She clutched the edge of it like it was her own child. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "Not after everything." The next morning, light poured through the cracked window. The widow sat up slowly. Still not used to being safe, she stepped into the hallway and followed the sound of voices. In the kitchen, Lena and Ethan were eating, and Lena waved her. "Over morning," the girl said cheerfully. "Want more stew?" Ethan handed her a plate without asking questions. They ate in silence again. But this time, it felt less empty. After breakfast, Ethan asked his first real question. "What's your name?" She looked down, unsure if she should tell him. Then, she said quietly, "Virella," a soft name, almost musical, from a language most humans didn't speak. Ethan nodded slowly, like he was learning a name that mattered. Lena tilted her head. "Where are you from?" Virella hesitated, then answered, "The Outer Mindsarek district." Ethan's eyes sharpened at the name. "That place was hell," he muttered. She nodded, her voice cracking. It was, she began to tell them, not everything, but just enough. How she was taken there with her husband, forced to dig in poisonous soil. How their children were born underground, breathing thin air. How sickness came. How her husband died trying to protect her, and how she ran with no food, no help, and nothing left to lose. She didn't tell them about the collar or the lashes or the days without light. Some things still lived in the dark corners of her memory. Lena looked at her with wide, quiet eyes. "You were brave," the girl said softly. Virella shook her head. "I was just desperate." Ethan leaned forward, arms on the table. "But you survived," he said. "That counts for something." Later that day, Virella tried to help clean the kitchen. She fumbled with human tools. Unfamiliar with the machines and gadgets, Ethan stopped her gently. "You don't need to work right now." But she shook her head. "I need to do something." Doing nothing made her feel like a ghost. That evening, she sat on the porch while Lena played with a small toy. Virella watched the stars come out. Tiny lights above a broken world. She spoke without looking at Ethan, who sat beside her. "Why do you trust me?" Ethan replied after a pause. "I don't, not yet." Virella blinked, surprised at his honesty. "But you helped me," she said. He nodded. "Because my daughter asked me to, and because I know what it's like to lose everything." Virella turned to him, her voice softer now. "What did you lose?" Ethan stared into the distance. "My wife," he said. The war took her just like it took everything else. Silence sat between them for a long moment. Then, Lena ran up and threw her arms around them both. "Now we have each other," she said happily. Varela looked down at the little girl's bright eyes, and for the first time, smiled. A small smile, but real. The kind that comes when something broken begins to heal. The next morning was cold and quiet. Varela stepped outside to breathe the fresh air. She stood on the small porch, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The streets looked calm, almost peaceful, but she knew better. Behind the broken windows and half-built homes, people watched. The humans in this colony had lost much. Fathers, brothers, wives, many to the war, some to hunger, and some blamed all aliens for their pain. To them, Varela was a living reminder of what they hated. It didn't take long. By midday, whispers turned into voices. "Did you hear? Ethan's hiding one of them. She's living in his house. He brought one of them into our town that afternoon." As Varela helped Ethan carry tools to the garden, a stone hit the wall beside her. She froze, her hands shaking. Ethan looked up sharply, his eyes scanning the rooftops. Another voice followed, loud and angry. "You don't belong here, alien." Ethan stepped forward, shielding her. "Who threw that?" he shouted. No one answered, but more faces appeared behind windows. Fear and hate. Varela had seen those looks before. Later, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, rubbing his temple. "They're scared," he said quietly. "Scared people make dangerous choices." Varela nodded, staring at her hands. "I should leave," she said. "I don't want Lena to get hurt." Before Ethan could answer, Lena burst into the room. "No," she said firmly. "You're not going anywhere." The girl climbed into Varela's lap and hugged her tightly. "Your family now," she whispered. Varela felt the tears coming, but blinked them away. Still, the fear stayed inside her like a shadow. The next day, it got worse. A small group gathered outside Ethan's house, 4 men and 2 women, holding tools, some with metal pipes in hand. They didn't attack, but their message was clear. "Get her out," one man said, "or we'll make you regret it." Ethan stood on the porch, calm but firm. "She's under my roof, and that means she's under my protection." The crowd murmured, but didn't move. Lena ran outside and stood beside her father, her arms stretched wide. "Leave her alone," she shouted. "She's kind." One of the women looked unsure now. "She's not like the ones who hurt us," Lena added. "She's my mom now." That word "mom" made the crowd pause. Varela watched from the window. Frozen in place, her heart pounded, unsure if she should cry or run. The people began to argue among themselves. "She's just a child," one said. "But the girls?" "Happy," another whispered. "We can't trust her," someone snapped. "But maybe we've forgotten how to forgive," came a softer voice. Eventually, the group left, confused and unsure. But Varela knew they would return. That night, Ethan checked the door locks twice. He handed Varela a small shock device, sold, but still working. "Only use it if they break in," he said. Varela nodded, her hand shaking as she placed it beside her mattress. She didn't sleep that night. She lay still, listening to the wind, the creaks of the walls, every small noise. And in the quiet, memories returned, the screams from the mines, the crying of her children, the silence of her husband's last breath. She curled up and whispered to herself, "Don't let this place become another cage." In the morning, she tried to smile for Lena. The girl offered her a flower she'd found near the garden. "It's called hopeweed," Lena said proudly. "It only grows in places that heal." Varela took the flower and held it close. Maybe, just maybe, this place could be different later. That day, an old man came to the house. He stood at the gate, arms crossed. "I'm not here to fight," he said, "just to talk." Ethan invited him in cautiously. Varela stayed near the hallway, watching from a distance. I lost my son in the war. The man began. Shot by someone who looked like her. Varela lowered her eyes, feeling the weight of those words. But I also lost my granddaughter, the man added, to sickness, because no one would help us. He looked at her, not with hate, but with deep tiredness. I don't forgive easily, he said, but if she can help that girl smile again, maybe it's time I try. He placed a basket of food on the table and left. Varela stood frozen, her hands covering her mouth. Not everyone would hate her. Not everyone wanted her gone. That night, she stood outside, looking at the stars. Lena joined her, holding her hand. Do you still want to leave? The girl asked. Varela squeezed her hand gently. No, she whispered, not anymore. And for the first time in years, she meant it. The morning sun peeked through the dusty window. Painting the kitchen in soft gold, Varela stood quietly. By the sink, washing bowls with slow, careful hands. She had never washed dishes like this before, not in a real home, not with warm water. It was strange, peaceful even. Like a dream she didn't dare trust yet. Lena sat at the small wooden table, legs swinging back and forth. She was humming a tune, something sweet and light. Varela paused. Listening to the melody, it reminded her of a lullaby, one she hadn't sung in years. A song from her home world, where skies were green and rivers sang with light. Lena looked up suddenly, eyes curious. Do alien moms sing bedtime songs? She asked, tilting her head. Varela's hands froze in the water, her heart skipping a beat. She didn't answer right away. Lena blinked, then spoke. Again, softer this time. Did you sing to your kids? Varela closed her eyes, and the memories rushed in. 2 small children, voices laughing, one with a missing tooth, the other chasing stars drawn on the walls. Her voice, tired but warm, singing to them in the darkness of the mining tunnels. She took a shaky breath. Yes, she whispered. I used to sing every night. Lena smiled gently. Can you sing one now? Varela hesitated, her throat tight, but then she nodded. She sat beside Lena and began to hum. The song was soft, in a language Lena didn't know, but the melody felt warm like a blanket, like love, like something almost forgotten. Lena leaned against her arm, listening with closed eyes. When the song ended, neither of them moved. Then Lena whispered, I like it. Varela didn't speak, but she smiled, a real smile, small and sad. Lena opened her eyes and looked up. You can be my mom now if you want. The words hit Varela like thunder. Her breath caught in her chest, and she looked down at the little girl. Why would you want me? She asked, voice barely a whisper. Because I miss having a mom, Lena said. And you make the house feel warm again? Before Varela could answer, Ethan walked into the room. Carrying a toolbox, he paused, sensing the quiet moment. Everything all right? He asked. Lena grinned. We were just singing. Ethan raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, just nodded and went outside. Later that afternoon, Varela joined him near the garden. He was fixing a fence that had been knocked down. In last week's storm, Varela crouched beside him, picking up fallen nails. She hesitated, then asked, was Lena's mother kind? Ethan stopped hammering and looked at her. She was strong, he said. Smart, too. He leaned back and wiped sweat from his brow. She died in the last wave of bombings, during the withdrawal. Varela nodded slowly, her fingers pressing into the soft earth. I'm sorry, she said. He looked at her, then said, it wasn't your fault. Still, the silence that followed was heavy. Varela stood up and walked to the side of the garden, where yellow flowers were starting to grow. They called these death weeds on my world. She said, but here, they're just flowers. Ethan came beside her. Funny how names change things. She glanced at him. Do you think people can change too? He looked at her, steady and calm. "I think some already have," he said. "And others are just scared to try." That evening, after dinner, Lena drew pictures with crayons on old paper. Varela sat beside her, watching in silence. One drawing showed 3 figures, one tall man, one small girl, and one purple-skinned woman with long hair. Underneath it, Lena had written one word: family. Varela felt something stir inside her chest, a feeling she hadn't known in years' hope before. Bed. Lena stood in the hallway, holding her pillow. "Can I sleep in your room tonight?" she asked. Varela opened the door and nodded. Lena climbed into the old mattress beside her and whispered, "Sing me the song again." Varela sang, softer this time, and as Lena drifted to sleep, the alien woman lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling. She thought about her children, her past, her pain. But then she looked at the little girl beside her, and for once, she didn't feel so far from home. Maybe she couldn't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, she could build something new from the broken pieces. Maybe being a mother didn't end when your own children were gone. Maybe it could begin again, with a child brave enough to ask a question and a woman strong enough to answer it with love. The wind carried dust through the streets as another quiet week passed. Varela had begun to feel safer, almost like she belonged. She helped Ethan fix broken pipes, washed clothes with Lena, and even smiled without guilt. The townspeople didn't throw rocks anymore. Some nodded at her when she passed. Others stayed silent, but silence was better than hate. One evening, while she was sweeping the porch, 2 shadows appeared at the edge of the street. 2 men, tall, covered in brown travel coats, stood watching the house. Their eyes were sharp, their boots heavy with dust from long roads. Varela's heart stopped. She knew them, not their names, but their faces. Miners from Zarek district, the place she had escaped. They had worked near the guards, helped manage the prisoners, and remembered Hershey was sure of it. Ethan stepped outside and saw her frozen in place. He followed her. Gaze and frowned. The taller man spoke first. Well, look who's hiding in plain sight," he said, voice like gravel. Varela stayed still, her hands tightening on the broom. The second man took a step forward, didn't expect to see one of the warden girls living in a human house. Ethan stepped in front of her, his voice calm but firm. "She's under my roof," he said. "Whatever grudge you carry, leave it outside." The first man scoffed. "She was part of the system that whipped our brothers. She gave orders while humans bled." The second added. Varela finally spoke, her voice low and broken. "I was forced, like the others." They laughed, cold and cruel. "Don't act like a victim now." One said, "You wore the uniform." Ethan stood his ground. "She's not that person anymore." The men looked at each other, then at him. "Maybe not." One said slowly, "But others won't be so kind when they find out." With that, they turned and walked away, their boots echoing like thunder in Varela's chest. That night, she couldn't eat. She sat in the dark room, clutching the old blanket like a shield. Lena noticed something was wrong. She crawled into bed and hugged Varela's arm. "Are you sick?" she asked. "No." Varela whispered, "Just scared." She didn't tell Lena what the men had said, didn't say how her past might destroy everything she had now. Later, when Lena was asleep, Varela sat alone at the table. Ethan joined her, pouring hot tea into a chipped mug. "I can tell you're thinking about running," he said quietly. She didn't answer. He continued, "But if you leave, you're letting them take your future again." "I don't want her to be in danger," Varela said, her voice trembling. Ethan looked at her, eyes steady. "Then stay and fight for the life she gave you." The next morning, the town was buzzing with whispers again. The men had spoken, told stories from the mines, some true, some twisted. People looked at Varela with new eyes, some full of doubt, others with anger. One woman stopped her near the well. My brother died in those tunnels, she said coldly. Tell me did. You watch. Varela swallowed hard. I buried my husband in those same tunnels, she replied. And I carried my son until he stopped breathing. The woman stared at her for a long time, then walked away without another word. Ethan stayed close. That day, fixing fences near the house, Lena made Varela draw pictures with her to cheer her up. But the air was heavy, like a storm waiting to break. That night, Varela packed a small bag, a piece of bread, the scarf Lena had given her, and one of the drawings a picture of their little family. She placed the bag beside the door and sat on the floor, watching the stars through the window. When she heard footsteps, she expected Ethan, but it was Lena, holding her pillow. You're leaving, aren't you? The girl asked quietly. Varela couldn't lie. I thought maybe it would be safer. She said, for you. Lena's eyes filled with tears. I don't want to lose another mom. She whispered, please don't go. Varela's heart broke. She reached out and pulled the child into her arms. I'm scared, Lena, she said. I don't want to hurt you by staying. Lena pressed her face against Varela's chest. But you're the only one who makes me feel like I have a mom again, she said. Isn't that worth fighting for? At that moment, Ethan appeared in the hallway, arms crossed. She's right, he said. You don't owe anyone your past, but you owe her a future. Varela looked at both of them, tears falling down her cheeks, and slowly, she stood, walked over to the bag and unpacked it. She wasn't running this time, not because she was brave, but because a little girl had chosen her, and she couldn't walk away from that kind of love again. Asterisk, the day began with sunlight and silence. Birds flew across the broken rooftops, and the wind was soft for once. It felt like peace. But peace can be a lie. Varela stood in the small garden, pulling weeds while Lena chased a butterfly nearby. Ethan worked near the fence, sleeves rolled up, sweat on his brow. It was a normal day until the alarms rang. A long, sharp sound echoed through the town. Everyone froze. Then came the voice over the crackling speaker, all residents to shelter. Emergency breach at the west wall. Ethan dropped his tools. Varela turned to him, eyes wide. What does it mean? She asked. It means trouble, he said, grabbing a nearby bag. Lena, inside. Now? But it was already too late. Smoke rose in the distance, and flames followed. The machines were coming. Rogue harvesters left behind after the war, twisted metal monsters programmed to destroy anything that moved. They were old, but still deadly. People screamed as they ran through the streets. Families rushed toward the underground shelters, but the machines didn't wait. They smashed through. Walls tore through homes. Varela grabbed Lena and held her tight. We have to move, she said. Voice shaking, Ethan led the way, but the smoke was thick. One machine burst through a nearby building, its red eyes glowing. It spotted them, and its arms began to spin, blades clicking into place. Run, Ethan shouted, pushing Varela and Lena forward, but as they reached a collapsed roof, part of it gave way. A beam crashed down, pinning Ethan's leg. He cried out, falling to the ground. Ethan, Varela screamed, dropping beside him. She tried to lift the beam, but it was heavy, too heavy. The machine was coming, crawling over debris like a spider. Lena sobbed, holding on to her father's hand. I can't leave him, Varela said, panic in her chest, and then something inside her snapped. She remembered the mines, the cages, the days when she had no choice. But now, she had a choice. She stood, screamed, and grabbed the beam with both hands. Her muscles burned. Her old scars ached, but she lifted it. Ethan crawled out, and she dropped the beam behind him. The machine was closer now, but Varela wasn't done. She turned and faced it. Take Lena and run, she shouted to Ethan before he could stop her. She grabbed a metal rod and charged. The machine swung its blade, but she ducked. She slammed the rod into its side. Sparks flew. It wasn't enough to destroy it, but it gave Ethan time to escape. Another explosion rocked the street. More townspeople joined the fight with homemade weapons and old rifles. Together, they pushed back the machines. One by one, the monsters fell. And when the smoke cleared, the town still stood. Later, in the evening light, people gathered in silence. Some were hurt. Some had lost their homes, but they were alive. And they had seen something they couldn't forget. They had seen the alien woman, the one they doubted stand between them and death. She wasn't a monster. She wasn't a warden. She was a mother, a protector, a survivor. Virella sat beside Ethan, her arm wrapped in cloth, her face smudged with ash. Lena sat on her lap. Holding on to her tightly, Ethan looked at her with new eyes. "You saved me," he said. "You saved all of us." Virella looked down. "I just did what I had to." He shook his head. "No," he said. "You did what was right." One of the town's elders walked up slowly. He held a small badge worn, but still shining. It had once belonged to a peacekeeper, someone who protected the weak. He held it out to Virella. "You earned this today," he said. She didn't take it at first, unsure. But then Lena whispered, "Please." Virella reached out and held it in her hands. It was heavy, but it didn't hurt. It felt like something she could carry with pride. For the first time, the town didn't look at her with hate. They looked at her with something else, respect. That night, as the fires died down, Lena curled up beside her. Virella watched the stars and held the girl close. "I thought I had nothing left to fight for," she whispered, "but I was wrong." She kissed Lena's forehead. "I'll never leave you again." Weeks passed after the attack. The machines were gone, the streets were cleaner, and the people had changed. Walls that once held fear now showed signs of rebuilding. Children laughed again, and even the sky felt a little brighter. Virella stood in the garden, planting seeds beside Lena. The soil was still rough, but it would grow something, she believed that now. Lena pressed a tiny seed into the earth and looked up. "Will this one bloom yellow or blue?" Virella smiled softly. "I think it will be gold." Inside the house, Ethan adjusted a loose wire in the kitchen wall. He didn't say much these days, but his eyes were warmer. There was peace in his steps, like a man who no longer lived, only in memory. That afternoon, a group of officials arrived from the central city. 3 humans, 2 aliens, dressed in clean uniforms and long coats. They came not with weapons, but with papers. Ethan stood on the porch as they explained. "We've heard what happened here," one said. "The way your town survived." "How?" "It stood together," the older alien added. "And how one woman changed the hearts of many." They looked at Virella, who stood quietly beside Ethan and Lena. "We're offering relocation," the human said. "Better housing, access to schools, proper protection." Ethan frowned slightly. "We don't want to be split apart." The woman smiled. "We're not separating anyone. We want to honor what you've built, not undo it." Then came the unexpected words. "We'd also like to recognize her," the alien official said, pointing gently at Virella. "She is listed as a former worker from the Zarek mines, once thought missing." Virella's hands trembled, but she stood tall. "I was not missing," she said. "I was forgotten." The man nodded, and now remembered. He handed her a small ID chip and a certificate. "You are free, Virella, in every legal system of the outer colonies." She took the chip slowly, her fingers shaking. For so long she had been a ghost. Now she was real again. That evening, the town held a quiet celebration. Simple food, warm lights, and shared laughter. Virella wore a scarf Lena had made for her, blue, with little stars stitched along the edge. Ethan stood beside her, holding a cup of cider. Lena danced with other children, her laugh ringing out like music. Near the fire, Virella sat with the town elder, the one who had once doubted her. You didn't just survive, he told her. You made others stronger by staying. She looked into the flames and whispered, I stayed because a child believed in me. Later, when most had. Gone home, Ethan and Varela sat quietly on the porch. The stars were bright, the night calm. She changed everything, didn't she? Ethan said, watching Lena chase fireflies. Varela nodded. She gave me something to protect again. Ethan turned toward her. You gave her a mother. There was a long silence between them. Then, slowly, Ethan reached out his hand and placed it over hers. It was rough, warm, and steady. Varela looked at their hands together. Then at him. After all this, she whispered, You still want me here? He didn't smile, but his eyes said enough. I never wanted you gone, he replied. Lena ran over, her arms full of tiny glowing stones she had found. She saw their hands and grinned wide. You're holding hands? She giggled. Does that mean you're married now? Varela laughed softly for the first time in days. Not yet, Ethan said, but maybe. One day, Lena nodded. Good, because I already drew us as a family. The next morning, Varela hung the drawing. On the kitchen wall, 3 figures standing under a sun made of gold. 1 man, 1 alien woman, 1 little girl with stars in her hair. Above it, Lena had written in big, crooked letters, HOME. From a cold alley where she begged for food, to a warm kitchen filled with laughter, from a stranger's pain, to a child's love, everything had changed. And all because 1 small hand was offered not with fear, but with hope, the hand of a child, the hand that changed everything.